Happy New Year's Eve, everybody. So, as a crazy but certainly forgettable 2020 is about to come to an end, and for some people, it's probably is now ended, and that it is officially 2021, and that I know by the time this video is gonna finish recording and upload to my channel, Europe pretty much is about to celebrate the beginning of 2021, and for me, it's gonna be another 9 hours before that is going to happen. Let's take a look at the 15 biggest headlines that happened in MLS this season. And I gotta say, it was actually pretty hard to come up with just 15 headlines that has happened in MLS this season because there was tons of headlines that happened this season with how chaotic this season is. And speaking of which, let us actually begin with the first thing, which is none other than the chaotic but unforgettable 25th MLS season that is. I mean, coming into this season, this was certainly a landmark season in MLS, celebrating its 25th season, and that there was going to be a lot of celebration that is going to go on. But I don't think anybody would have predicted that this 25th season will be remembered as a very chaotic, but at the same time, just a year that I don't think a lot of people hope that MLS is going to have to deal with the same situation ever again. I mean, we know what happened all the way back in March, where the season was stopped after just 2 games because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the season didn't resume until July when we had the MLS's Back Tourman down in Orlando, and then the season once again resumed again with different phases during August all the way to November, and then we also had games that was postponed either because of teams getting tested positive for COVID-19, and in some case, some teams weren't able to even play a single game because they had a COVID outbreak in their team. We also had Canadian team that wasn't able to play in their home market from phase 2 beyond, and that they had to play against each other for phase 1 of the schedule. And obviously, a lot of people will never forget the whole Black Lives Matter situation, and that there was games that was postponed in the protest of cops shooting black people, and that it was just really chaotic of how this 25th MLS season is, and certainly would be an unforgettable one. But as I said, hopefully as we head to next season, we don't have to ever deal with this same situation. I mean, as chaotic as, and at times maybe kind of fun to see how things have gone, let's just hope we will never have to deal with what we had to deal with for this 25th MLS season. And also, I just want to say that it was also a miracle, the fact that in this chaotic and crazy 25th MLS season, we actually were able to award an MLS Cup champion. I mean, there was definitely time that people thought that the season wasn't going to finish. And heck, I think back in May, if you would have told me that we are going to finish the season and eventually there's going to be a champion that is awarded near the end of the year and right around December, I would say you're kind of being too optimistic because of how things have gone. But at the end of the day, we were able to award the champion this season in December, and the season was able to finish right around the same time where it usually originally where an MLS season finished in December. Now, the next thing that is the biggest headline is obviously the creation of the MLS's Back Tourman, and I did do a video talking about some of my most memorable thing from the MLS's Back Tourman. I mean, from the crazy 4-3 game between the Quakes versus Vancouver, and I would also say that was also a game that is known as the Magic Spray Flare moment, where I can't believe not a lot of teams have ever thought of this idea where you can actually use a magic spray as a flare as a way to kind of celebrate. And I think the Quakes also kind of did something similar to that once they clinched themselves into the playoffs in that victory against LAFC. And I just kind of wonder why many teams don't do that more often, because that's such a clever way to do so. We also had no fans in attendance, which means that we can basically hear what coaches are basically saying. One of my most memorable moment of that is that Ben Olsen basically decided to drop F-bombs every 10 seconds on the sideline, and that Fox was trying so hard to trying to basically censor, and the same goes with ESPN, was trying to censor hit all the f bombs that he was dropping and all the f bombs that was happening throughout the field. And then of course the fake crowd noises, which I didn't really find it that very well, and that I didn't really like the fake crowd noises that was happening during the game. Like, it was kind of weird seeing a game that was happening in a soccer complex, and the fact that there's fake crowd noise that just doesn't really kind kind of help the experience of actually watching game, that maybe we can pretend that there was actually fans in the stands. And then of course we also had the situation where there was a lot of concern of whether or not if this tournament is even going to finish, because we don't know whether or not the bubble is actually going to work. Well, it turns out it works, and we were able to finish the tournament in August. But in terms of the next two things that I'm going to talk about is going to be related to the MLS's Back Tourman. And as I said, there's just so much things that happen in the MLS's Back Tourman. I'm only going to pick two things out of some of the most memorable thing that happened in the tournament in this sport. Talk about the 15 biggest headline in MLS. One of them is the heroic of Thomas Hassan. I mean, every tournament, it just always seems like there's always this one unsung hero, and there's this one player that not only had a breakout season or a breakout tournament in this case, but it's just that we always have this happen where this breakout kind of tournament that this player has just kind of came out of nowhere, and that nobody kind of expected that he would be the guy that will have a breakout tournament, and that we basically would know his name by the end of the tournament. Well, in this case, we will definitely know the name of Thomas Hassan, and that coming into this tournament, you probably have never heard of who Thomas Hassan is. Well, he basically stepped in that second game against the Seattle Sounders for the injured Maxime Crepeau, and obviously when he stepped into the game, I thought it was going to be definitely brutal for a guy that makes his very first start in a rough situation. And I thought for the rest of the tournament, yeah, Vancouver was probably pretty much done in terms of their chances of moving on, if those chances of them moving on into the next round was already less than before. But instead, he was able to put a shutout for the last 20 minutes of that game against a stingy kind of Sounders attack. And then in that game against the Chicago Fire, he was able to not only get his very first start, but also post his first ever win in his MLS career. And even in that round of 16 game against SKC, he pulled a shutout and made some incredible save during that game. And that was also the game we will always known as the Wall of Hassan, because it just feels like nothing was going to get past Hassan during that game, and that no matter what kind of a shooting gallery that Sporting KC was putting against Thomas Hassan, he was going to be denying every single chance that SKC had in terms of scoring goals. And that, unfortunately, that kind of story, even though we were hoping maybe it will have a fairy tale story of him winning the penalty kick shootout, it didn't happen. Vancouver did lose the PK shootout, but nobody will forget the moment that Thomas Hassan has during that tournament, and that, even after the tournament itself, before he of course unfortunately got himself injured and suffer a concussion, he was also very good for this Whitecaps team. And there's even some people are saying maybe he could take over the Whitecaps starting goalkeeper role over Maxime Crepeau. And that, I think this offseason for the Whitecaps, not only the fact that they want to continue to improve their team, they got a goalkeeper dilemma that they're going to have to figure out heading into next season. Are they going to try to keep a goalkeeper that's been red hot in Thomas Hassan and promote him as the starting role, or are they going to bring back Maxime Crepeau and he's going to remain as the starter of this team? They definitely have a big decision that they're going to be making in terms of that spot heading into next year. And then the other things that of course happen in this tournament is of course Orlando City run in the MLS's back tournament. I mean, this was really the tournament that really got Orlando City on the map. Not only the fact that it took place in Orlando, but it really kind of showed why they are definitely for real, and they definitely could be a force in MLS. I mean, we knew that coming into this season with all the big moves that they've been making this offseason, and that I even crowned them once again as the offseason champion of the league. We knew that they could potentially be a very decent team, and also getting Oscar Pereira, who is known for getting teams into the playoffs and getting team to have success during the regular season. We knew that they could potentially be a decent team. But what we didn't know is that can they actually be that decent team? And that we've seen this story before where they could sign a ton of players in the offseason and crown themselves as the champion of the offseason. And then when the season began, it turns out to be a huge disappointment. Well, not only the fact that this year they basically erase all the past history of them having turns out to be a big disappointment after all the hype that they built up in the off season. But they also really become a team that everybody really enjoyed watching them, and kind of started to become fan of this team with the entertaining soccer that they of course play. And that during that MLS's Back Tourman, I'm pretty sure a lot of people were rooting for Orlando City to go all the way and actually win the tournament outright, which they came close by reaching the final, but unfortunately fall in the final hurdle against the Portland Timbers. But nobody will forget of their resounding runs to the tournament. And also, you could also say that was the first time ever they were able to get into the knockout round for the first time in franchise history, after failing to do that for the first 5 years of their existence in MLS. Now, moving away from the MLS's Back Tournament and talking about the regular season and some of the headlines. Well, one of the biggest headlines coming out of the regular season is the fact that the Supporter Shield was canceled and then put back on. So it was kind of weird seeing that the Supporter Shield Foundation say that, well, because of how crazy this season has gone, we are just going to cancel the Supporter Shield. And then there was definitely a lot of backlash that was happening, and there was also players and coaches that was angry the fact that all the hard works that they've been doing this year, and it basically meant nothing. And there was also fans that was I kind of find it ironic that in the past fans complain about the Supporter Shield not being a legitimate trophy, and that it's kind of just a redundant kind of trophy, and that the real price that you want to aim for after or the real price you want to aim for during the season is definitely MLS Cup. But then when it was announced that the Supporter Shield was canceled, these same fans that has that kind of feeling just started to kind of got outraged the fact that the Supporter Shield was canceled, even though that, as I said before, they didn't think that this trophy was actually the something that is very meaningful, and it's kind of like an afterthought kind of trophy for MLS team to win. But the outrage, of course, that was sent to the Supporter Shield Board Foundation saw them kind of put a lot of pressure of them putting this trophy back on, and indeed that is exactly what they did, as they decided to put the trophy back in contention, and that eventually we did have a Supporter Shield winner like we had in the past 25 years of this league. The other thing that was the biggest headlines in MLS is that big name players flop hard in MLS. I mean, we know what happened with Chicharito, of how after that big money move that he gone to the Galaxy, and really this is really finally a rumors that's been in years of makings that has finally happened, and we thought maybe Chicharito can really do well with the Galaxy, and kind of might be the player that we thought a couple of years ago of why a lot of teams want to get him to head to this league. No, he did not do any of that. Only scored 2 goals for the Galaxy throughout the entire season, and now there is a big question of what are they going to do with Chicharito, and that there's even some rumors saying that Chicharito could potentially go back to Liga MX and even go back to where his career all began at Chivas. But we shall see what's going to happen, and that if you're the Galaxy, it's got to hurt the fact that this was supposed to be a big name player that was potentially maybe replace some of the goals that Zlatan was able to score, and it turns out it was a huge flop, and they waste a ton of money in order to get them. I believe it was like $7 million that they waste in order to get him, and all he did was provide 2 goals throughout the entire season. Speaking of $7 million, another player that was a huge flop that also was bought for $7 million was Gonzalo Higuain from Inter Miami, and Higuain basically kind of had the same story as Chicharito. Although unlike Chicharito, that's been kind of a flop throughout the entire season, he was pretty much a flop during when he came into this league in the middle of the season. And the sign that he was kind of a flop all started when he, of course, missed a penalty against the Union, and then kind of got a little bit salty when a couple of the Union players were making fun of him for missing the penalty. And really the only moment you can remember from Higuain was that wonderful free kick that he scored against the Red Bulls. But yeah, other than that, to think that that was the player that Inter Miami thought that they finally found the final piece of their puzzle in terms of actually getting a decent attack, and finally found a number 9 that can bang in goals, and it turns out he only scored 1 goal throughout the half season that he's in. And speaking of Inter Miami, I might as well also throw in Blaise Matuidi into this too. I mean, Matuidi, a guy that was a regular starter for Juventus and a World Cup winner from France, and the fact that when he come to MLS, a lot of people thought that this was not only a great signing for Inter Miami, but such a steal, the fact that they were able to get him on a TAM contract. Well, after the way that he's been performed, I think some people will now agree that steal that they got from him for a TAM contract, they're pretty thankful that they actually got him for a TAM contract, because if he was going to occupy another DP spot for Inter Miami, yeah, that's going to be another player for Inter Miami that was a huge flop in terms of occupying the designated player spot. And in general, if you look at all the DPs that Inter Miami has, pretty much all of them was considered a huge flop. Well, maybe besides Rodolfo Pizarro, which I'll give him the pass because of the fact that at least he tried to perform this year, and that there was just multiple times where he wasn't even play in the right position, and that when you, of course, aren't able to play at the position that you want to be, it's obviously going to be tough to try to perform at the highest level. But yeah, we saw this year that there were a couple of big name players that flopped hard after the hype that was surrounded of them coming to MLS. And also, this pretty much also proves me the point that just because you're going to get a European superstar player to come to MLS and you think that they're going to do well and going to destroy the league by scoring tons of goals, that doesn't mean it always comes true. And in fact, it's more time or not, we've seen these aging European superstar players to come to MLS, and that they start to really struggle and not make as much of an impact for a team as we've seen in the past couple of years in the league. Now, the other thing that was the biggest headline in MLS is none other than the San Jose Earthquakes season. I mean, I haven't did a moving forward series for the San Jose Earthquakes yet, but boy oh boy, when I get to that, I'm gonna have a lot of things to talk about how much of a roller coaster season this was been, and how this could be a team that on times where they could give up like 5 or 6 and 7 goals a game, and then yet there's somehow in some way they were able to beat LAFC on the road 2-1 and beat them for the very first time, and then were able to pretty much own California and beating both LA team, and able to pull off victory and get themselves back into the playoff spot, despite the fact that, as I said back in October when they were conceding so many goals and was losing by big margin, I was giving up on the Quakes season. I didn't think there was a shoestring chance that this team was going to make it to the playoffs, and the fact that they turned the season around, and the fact that how roller coaster and how chaotic that this season has been, boy oh boy, I got a lot of things to talk about in that moving forward series about the Quakes, and that I think they probably have maybe the craziest and the most roller coaster season any team has ever had, because I don't remember the last time a team can be this bad at one point of the period, and then yet all of a sudden decide to become so good without even maybe changing the head coach or even changing the personality. I mean, for most part in the second half of the season, those players that was on the pitch and Almeida being on the touchline was pretty much the same as the disaster that they had in the first half of the season. But again, it was just kind of mind-boggling of how they could at one point of the season becoming the worst team in MLS and simply playing the worst soccer that any MLS team has ever played in league history, and all of a sudden just turned it on and becoming one of the hottest team in MLS just like that. The other thing that was the biggest headlines in MLS is Atlanta United, and you knew I of course have to include Atlanta, and that I think if there is the most disappointing team from this season, it's got to be Atlanta United. I mean, just a dramatic fall from grace from a team that regularly competes for MLS Cup to being a team that basically got eliminated in the regular season and suffered their first season without being in the playoffs. And many people say that Atlanta dramatic fall from grace kind of started in the MLS's Back Tourman, which in some way it is. You could say that is the case because they're the only team to not register a goal or even a single point during the tournament. But I think it all started all the way back in that Nashville game when Joseph Martinez, of course, had suffer a torn ACL and basically was done for the season, and that really kind of started to snowball. Things were really started to go wrong with this team, and then the MLS's Back Tournament basically solidified the fact that things completely took for the turn for the worse for Atlanta. Eventually, they fired their head coach Frank DeBoer, had Stefan Glass as their replacement, and he didn't really do much to improve the team, and just they were getting stuck in that mediocrity and kind of a team that was never able to eventually turn it on to maybe rescue their season and not suffer an embarrassing elimination and not making it to the playoffs. But that, of course, is going to be the case, and we shall see heading into next season with them making their first ever transitional period in the off season. What are they going to be looking like in next season? Is this team going to get back to the way that they were in the first three season, which is a team that is regularly competes in the playoffs? And then moving away from the regular season to talk about the playoffs now in terms of the biggest headline in MLS. I mean, probably the biggest headlines in the playoffs has to be that chaotic penalty kick shootout between NYCFC versus Orlando. And, I've already mentioned it a lot of times, so I'm not going to continue to kind of beat the dead horse to talk about what actually happened in that moment. But all I'll say is that basically that was a game that we'll remember as an outfield player in Rodrigo Strego becoming probably the one of the most heroic player that we've ever seen in the playoffs in league history by saving a penalty and able to guide Orlando to move on into the next round. And that we will also remember that was a moment where NYCFC, you definitely don't want to remember this moment, and this will unfortunately live they will have to painfully swallow as basically becoming the only team to be ever eliminated in the PK shootout by an outfield player in league history. But moving on, in terms of the next biggest headlines in MLS is the historic run that Nashville had in the playoffs. I mean, Nashville definitely proved everybody wrong in terms of their expansion season. And if you would have asked me who is the most surprising team coming out of this season, it has to be Nashville. Like, nobody expected that this was going to be a team with the squad that they built in the offseason. I thought it was going to be another FC Cincinnati level of a squad. But instead, this was a team that not only made it to the playoffs, but becoming only the second team to able to get themselves into actually becoming the third team to be able to get to the conference semifinal, but also becoming only the second team to ever win their first two playoff game, and also becoming the sixth team to make it into the playoffs in their expansion year. And also with the way that they finished 7th in the Eastern Conference, even without the expanded playoff, they would have made it to the playoffs either way. So, it's just remarkable how Nashville was able to make it to the playoffs and even had a good run during the playoffs. And the way that they kind of play, it might not be the most entertaining soccer, and you could maybe say that some of the soccer that Nashville play and some of the soccer that Gary Smith puts into this team is kind of very boring and kind of lackluster. But that's kind of old school soccer that they were playing this season, with them focusing on defense as the most important part. And as long as if they can be very very hard to trying to crack in terms of their defense and score just enough goals, they are able to get victories. And that formula, more times or not during the regular season, works out for them, and they continue to carry that into the playoffs, where their attack did start to kind of get going, and that was also kind of the one thing that powers them in terms of making a deep run heading into the playoffs. And they definitely show no signs of a team that, many times when the team made it to the playoffs for the first time in their franchise history, you would think that there's going to be some nervous moment and that maybe this is kind of it. They'll just be happy that they've been into the playoffs. No, that's not what this Nashville team is. They want more than them just being in the playoffs and making history by becoming the sixth expansion team to make it to the playoffs. They also want to go to even more history of trying to becoming maybe the second team to ever win MLS Cup in their expansion year, but unfortunately they fell in that hurdle in the conference final against the Columbus Crew. So talk about a historic run to now talking about probably one of the biggest collapse we have ever seen in playoff history, and that of course is the Philadelphia Union. And obviously I know the Union, they will remember as a team that had such a collapse of winning the Supporters Shield, but then getting ousted in the first round by the New England Revolution. But I think a lot people will always remember as this was kind of the people's team, and kind of the team that if you're a U.S. men's national fan, you're definitely supporting this team very hard, because they were providing some very good young talent and potentially future U.S. men's national team players that could really break out into this team. And this team was also providing multiple players that eventually was going to make the jump to go to Europe. Brendan Aronson, and then recently Mark McKenzie has been the latest these players that was on the Supporter Shield team that have now made the jump to Europe. And the fact that they were able to win the Supporter Shield pretty much with a team that was full of academy player just shows you that sometimes in this league you don't really need to buy a lot of players, and you don't really need to just spend a lot of money like with the likes of how Atlanta and LAFC, or even in some case Toronto, try to do. If you invest heavily on your academy, you can potentially get on to the top of the mountain, which is winning the Supporter Shield, and that is exactly what they did. But that being said, they will also remember as one of the few Supporter Shield team to ever getting themselves eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. I think the last time that a Supporter Shield winner got ousted in the first round of the playoffs was that 2012 Quakes team, where that was a team that we always will remember as the Goonies and the never say die kind of team, and the fact that they were able to win the Supporter Shield despite the fact that there was a lot of games that they got very fortunate resort and got some last minute goals and last minute win, and that a lot of people thought that team even eventually their luck kind of will ran out, and that it kind of did ran out in the first round of the playoffs. Now the other thing that was probably the biggest headline in MLS, and probably something that doesn't get as much attention that I think it should need, is the fact that Bruce Arena really turned back the clock and got the Revs in the conference final. In fact, this year, in terms of the playoffs and the way that New England got through all the way to the conference final, almost felt like we have just traveled back in time, where this was once upon a time when MLS usually always dominated by the Revs, and a team that always find a way to get themselves into the conference final and even representing the Eastern Conference in MLS Cup. But lately we haven't really kind of saw that, and the Revs kind of gone through a period of the time where it was probably the roughest period in their team history. But then Bruce Arena came in, he absolutely turned back the clock and got this team all the way to the conference final, and almost becoming the first MLS Cup, or the first team that reached MLS Cup to become the 8th seed to, of course, able to do so. But of course, unfortunately, they fell in the final hurdle to reach that quest against the Columbus Crew. But I'm pretty sure not a lot of people thought the Revs was going to make a deep run and head to the conference final. I mean, we knew that this Revs team had some decent talent, but not many people thought that they could make it that far. And that the Revs is also kind of an example of what happened when a team can be able to find a moment where they are in their best form of the season, and when they're able to do that in the playoffs, it can be very hard to try to stop them and stop a team that is like them being in the best form that they had during the playoffs in the entire season. The other thing that was the biggest headline in MLS, and another headline that I think doesn't get a lot of attention, and I think it should be getting more attention, is Reynoso record-breaking run in the playoffs. And I know in that painful full game between Minnesota and Seattle, as that was the game that I know down the line people will remember, the remarkable comeback that the Sounders was able to put against Minnesota by scoring 3 goals in the last 15 minutes to win 3-2. A lot of people will have forgotten what Reynoso did in that game, and also pretty much also the previous couple of games that he did for Minnesota in the playoffs, because really, he was the guy that carried the Loons throughout the playoffs, and he was a guy that registered a record 7 assists throughout the playoffs, and also become the first player to ever register back games with a hat trick of assists in the playoffs. And obviously in that game against Seattle, a lot of people will be forgotten that it was Reynoso the reason why Minnesota was up 2-0 in that game. He of course scored the wonderful free kick goal to give them the 1-0 lead, and then assisting the second one to Kevin Molino to get themselves up 2-0 in that one. And if it wasn't for that collapse that the Loons suffered in the last 15 minutes, he will definitely remember as a player that got this team to MLS Cup. And the fact that if there was an MVP that was awarded throughout the playoffs, Reynoso's got to win that MVP with the way that he basically did something that no other player in league history was able to do until this playoffs, which is registered 7 assists throughout the entire run of the playoffs. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention in terms of the biggest headlines in MLS during the playoffs is none other than the Columbus Crew complete a storybook ending to winning MLS Cup. And not only the fact that that the Crew, a lot of people will also forgot that this was a team that was battling COVID-19 throughout the playoffs, and that there was a time where they basically had an outbreak that was happening with their team, and were missing some of their players. And then leading up to MLS Cup, they were missing probably 2 of their most important players on the attack, and yet somehow, in some way, despite the fact that everybody have written them off coming into that MLS Cup, and some even prematurely crowned the Seattle Sounders as the champions of MLS Cup, how many times did I have to tell you that you know, when you get into this stage, no matter what adversity a team might be faced, you have to play the game and see what happened. Well, the Columbus Crew played the game. They played probably the best game that they had in the entire season, and this was also a game known as the Lucas Zalarian show, because he absolutely stole the show was the contributor for all 3 of the goals that Columbus scored in this game. The Crew was able to win despite the challenge that they had with the COVID-19 outbreak. And then the other thing that makes this such a storybook ending is that, remember how the Crew was literally on the brinks of moving to Austin, and then we had the whole Save the Crew movement that happened in the 2018 season? Yeah, the Crew of course was saved, and little do we know that just in a short amount of season they would reach to the top of the mountain of MLS, and eventually winning a historic second MLS Cup to their name from this season. So overall, I think there's no doubt, if there's any team that is worthy to win MLS Cup, it's got to be the Columbus Crew, with just such a storybook way that this was a team that, as I said, was on the brinks of potentially relocating, and then just in a span of 2 years able to win MLS Cup. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that in terms of such a storybook kind of ending. And then the final thing that was the biggest headlines in MLS is got to be Wondo confirming that he'll be back with the Quakes for one last season. And I was kind of a little bit skeptical, should I have included this, because I think some people eventually knew that this was going to happen, but there was definitely some telling sign that, well, we expected this to happen, but there's no announcement whatsoever. And as the day continues, there was definitely some concern, and a lot of Quakes fans was getting a little bit frustrated the fact that the team is not going to announce it. Well, they finally announced it, and when it was finally announced, I think there has got to be a lot of relief in the Quakes fan base, and certainly in my sense too, because I am so happy that Wando is going to be coming back for one last year. And as I said before, I really hope that by the end of next season, we will have a full capacity crowd at the Quake Stadium to give him a proper sending off, because if there is one player that deserves a proper sending off and a proper last goodbye, it has to be Wando in front of a full capacity crowd at the Quake Stadium. But yeah, there we have it. That is pretty much it for the 15 biggest headlines in MLS this season. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this video? And again, since there was so much headlines that happened in MLS, there's definitely some that I didn't mention on the board that I think you guys would want me to talk about. So for that, you can of course leave your comment below in terms of some of the biggest headline you think that happened in MLS, and I'll definitely reply to that. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button. Happy New Year's to everybody, and hope that 2021 things are going to be better heading into next season. I mean, I know we are currently having a situation where it seemed like maybe we're going to be once again heading into a lockout because of what I talked about yesterday in the news of the week, where MLS and the MLSPA is once again fighting among each other in terms of the current CBA that was made back in June. But hopefully that of course will resolve, and the fact that we are not going to have a lockout and have even more of a frustrating 2021 season as we had dealt with in the previous season, which is the season could potentially not start on time because of a possible lockout that is looming in the league. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.